Jason Linett explains how hypnotizing 250,000 people can help you build a work smart business. Tonight on Write It Out.
Have you ever had that experience where you had an instant connection to someone new? The moment you met that person, perhaps it was as if you were connecting with a friend, someone you've known for a long time. On the other hand, what about those times you knew you were out of sync with somebody? Your communication and interaction were just not meshing. What if there was a way to empower these human connections on purpose? Imagine allowing your communication to become more influential and perhaps even a little hypnotic.
All right. So here's what everyone missed when we realized we weren't recording. All right. So, Jason Linett, you have hypnotized 250,000 people, and you clearly state that the number one lesson you've learned in business comes from watching The Simpsons.
Yeah, it's where inspiration can come from the most unique sources that's out there. And it's a character that sadly is no longer on the program because it was voiced by the late, great Phil Hartman, Troy McClure. And every time you saw Troy McClure, the whole bit was he was this TV personality, and it was always the game that he had to introduce himself by reminding you of where you knew him from. So one of them was, my favorite was just he was on a second date. With one of Marge's sisters of, "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such events as last night's date." But it's always the game of there was some sort of meaningful connection. And yes, it played off as a comedy bit, yet it's where, as I look at the shape of my business that I've built over the years and what I've taught other people to do as well, it comes down to the mindset of building assets and leveraging them. So it's about taking the things that you've already done and using that as that leverage point to then scale up to the next phase of something. So you get an article printed about your business or about you, and it's not just that flash in the pan event, it's that opportunity now to take that piece and then spread that out to a much larger audience by asking who else needs to see this, which, yes, that was really driven home by watching the cartoon back in the days of he was there speaking to elementary school group, and I used to have all of these memorized. I think this one was, "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such school safety programs as lead paint, delicious but deadly." So to look at this opportunity, which, yes, to do it with a little bit more style and class, and I say that with full respect to Mr. Hartman, which Jingle All the Way is still a fantastic holiday movie. Go back and watch that one. So to look at this opportunity
every Christmas.
I know, right? So to look at that opportunity, the movie doesn't hold up. When my 5-year-old was watching it years ago, she's now 7, and she's going, "Why doesn't he just use his cell phone and buy the toy on Amazon?" Yeah. But to look at this opportunity, I mean, I'd share a quick story of a time that I did this within my business, that there was a specific industry I was looking to get into, a bit of an educational organization. And what I did was the entry point to all of this was that I reached out to a magazine that apparently if you end up in this role in the school system, that you just automatically receive this magazine. The same that you move into a house, you start to receive coupons for the local grocery store. Well, you become, in this part of my career many years ago, you become a high school principal, you just start to receive this magazine. And I reached out to them, and my whole thing with business is always the mindset of value first, rather than what can I sell these people, is instead, what can I give? What kind of experience can I share with them? So I reached out, and there were 2 pieces of experience that I had kind of highlighted that they had a need for: student participation and dealing with outside contracts. And the whole pitch, and yes, there was a little bit of polite, persuasive language in this, was to simply say, "Hey, I see that you have this magazine, and these 2 topics are ones that I keep discussing with the schools that I'm working. Which of these 2 would you think would be the best article for your readers?" And leaving out the obvious third option of, "Who are you?" So instead, leading with value, and it's from there that I got to be a published writer in this specific magazine. And yes, the fact that the magazine was printed, that served a really nice benefit. I started to receive a few more phone calls for the service I was providing back then. Yet the bigger response came from this Troy McClure effect of printing out a whole bunch of color copies and then sending them direct mail physical mail at the time to the decision makers that I was trying to reach out to, sending out thousands of these. And it was in that Troy McClure delivery of, hi, I'm Jason Linett. You may have seen my article in this magazine. I wanted to make sure you had an extra copy for your records. Here's a brief blurb about the program that I do. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Which the benefit was that I was using that ability to write. I was using that ability to convey a message, to get that foot in the door. I was no longer the vendor in that community. Instead, I was now positioned appropriately as the peer. As at that time, I had done several hundred programs at that point and just needed that extra little bit of a leverage point to then get to the decision makers even faster, which, again, using that Troy McClure delivery, even in print, and that power of writing something of quality that people are going to find value in, that's what really jump-started that big segment of my career.
Yeah, and that's actually, it's really funny that you say that, because it's a technique I guess I've lightly and accidentally used. Like when I became in the freelance market and just played the content mills, and it really is reminding them, kind of like think therefore I am type deal, and it built my confidence a lot. Saying that, like, well, I was published here, and I wrote for them, and I did that, and it gave me like a self-gratitude, which really did help me in my writing and stuff like that. Now, you've hypnotized 250,000 people. How many of those names do you remember?
Well, the number is expanded by the fact that so much of what I do, I have an office in Virginia where I work with people one-to-one. I travel around quite a bit doing speaking and presentations, so that expands out to the groups. And in our wonderful 21st century era, the opportunity that even as you and I are having this conversation, and even as eventually people will be listening to it, there's digital access programs that I have out there. So it's not always in that one-to-one environment, because it's where, as long as we have that motivation to produce that change, as long as we have that initial, let's call it conscious foot in the door, then from there the person can run the process on themselves. And I'm there by way of a surrogate, thanks to some of the programs that I have out there. I wanted to rewind back to something you had mentioned, though, about that leverage point of almost a bit of a confidence back towards yourself. It's where, in the business mindset, look at the value of show rather than tell. That I can sit here and say, no, here's what I've done, I'm really good at this. But it's so much more empowering when we have that testimonial. The person says, I went from barely receiving any phone calls to closing practically every one of them thanks to what I learned from Jason. That it's not me standing there saying, no, I'm good at this, trust me. It's instead that point that someone else has produced that asset for me. So that opportunity that, well, back to Troy McClure, does your freelance service satisfy this? Well, yes, you can actually read all about that in this article, rather than, yes, I'm good at this, trust me.
I swear to you, I promise.
Come on, just this once, yeah. So it's about, again, it's where everything comes back to that relationship, that this is that benefit of our 21st century atmosphere, that I could continue to add more hours. And there's a part of my career path when I was operating primarily as the hypnotist, working with clients for fears, working with people such as, quitting smoking or whatever the habit or behavior ought to be. And the opportunity to scale up the business could have just been add more hours, charge more money. It's instead that mechanism to build systems that I could begin to duplicate myself, and people could be interacting with me around the world, even as chances are when someone's listening to this podcast session later on, that I may be off, doing some other segment of my business, speaking to a group, at home playing with my kids. It's that opportunity that we can replicate ourselves in such a way that we can increase the reach of our work, increase the reach of our positive message that we put out there.
And talking about speaking to groups, I went ahead and watched a YouTube video we found. You talking in that TED program?
Yes.
And you covered something about the rapport built and had like a very unique approach to it. And it actually stopped me in my tracks. And what I was doing, I was like, oh, that's kind of a different way of looking at it, and it actually kind of changed the way I was looking at things from that day on. So I appreciate that, because you really had my mind boggled.
Well, I think
I was literally just sitting here in my office.
I think we need to intro this properly. Hi, I'm Jason Linett. You may remember me from my TED Talk, TEDx talk titled "Rethinking Rapport." There, Troy McClure all over again. No, let's chat about that for a moment. And these are themes that are not necessarily original to me in its basic concept. The whole idea of rapport building strategies that many of us have run into in some aspect before, and these are things that, as I drilled down in that presentation, which if you simply go to rethinkingrapport.com, that'll just redirect over directly to that YouTube link, thanks to the interwebs. So to look at that whole talk, it was all looking at how, many of us have heard the whole dialogue about sit like they sit, move like they move, use their words, and people will like you. Which, to realize that these were strategies that were not invented. Someone did not just sit down one day and decide, I'm going to come up with some techniques to make people like me. And this is a category of work that unfortunately has been bastardized in some format by really, really poor quality sales trainings of, if you move like they move, they're going to buy more. It's instead to look at the fact that all of this is original organic content that comes from tracking people who already had a bond with each other. These two people already got along. They were already communicating on a much more comfortable level. And these are the things they were already doing on purpose. They were already doing just organically because that connection was there. The couple, they like each other, they're in love, and she scratches her forehead and he scratches his temple. It's just this almost automatic response. So there's a lot of training that's out there in the business world about using the rapport strategies in such a way to almost, I hesitate to use the word, but artificially create that rapport, when the real thinking behind it is that it helps me to step into your model of the world. It helps me to step into your system of thinking to understand what it is that you need, what it is that your challenges that you're currently facing, and how can I better assist you in resolving that. Though the real point of that presentation was that rather than build rapport just for the sake of building rapport, recognize that in most of our communication there is some outcome that we're going after. So even in the shape of you and I talking to each other right now, yes, we want to have a meaningful conversation that the two of us will leave as better people as a result from, yet clearly there's also an audience that we want to expand that reach to as well. So to look at, there's always going to be some outcome to whatever the communication is. And my suggestion simply becomes build rapport in the direction that you wish for the person to go, that you wish the two of you to mutually go together. So it's to identify, and this is a common thing in business, that whether you're selling, whether you're already working with somebody, that mindset of realizing that sometimes we ask an outcome-based question. So how would you like that to be different? And instead the person starts to respond in such a way where they don't actually answer your question. They revert back to the old story. Oh, it was so difficult last year when this thing happened. So it's to recognize there's a moment where rather than moving the conversation forward, rather than moving that solution forward in that dialogue, instead they're backsliding into the problem, into that problem state. So it's to recognize that, again, when they're moving towards the solution, that's when we're heightening that rapport. When they're moving back into the old problem state, that's where I may start to respectfully break away. I may start to break eye contact, move in some new way. And it builds this sort of propulsion system towards these outcomes that we both mutually wish to achieve, to which some would hear that and they may pose the question of, well, isn't that influence? Isn't that manipulation or persuasion? And the statement simply becomes we are always communicating. We're always influencing, even if it's as simple as, where are we going to go out for dinner tonight? What are we going to order from the Chinese restaurant? What is it we're going to get on the pizza? Hey, what are we going to do this weekend when your family's in town? We are always influencing in some way. So if we're going to be always influencing, you might as well do it effectively. And here's another set of strategies to look at it differently.
Huh. See, that's such a unique way of looking at it. It's crazy. It's crazy. And that's what I was taken out of that is that, rapport is not what I thought it was initially. And that's such a weird thing. That's such a commonly used word. So, it's everyone has an understanding of the word, yet I don't feel like I understood it until I really listened to what you were saying during your speech.
Well, there's many sources where
that,
all this comes from, but again, it comes back to getting in sync with somebody. And we find ourselves in that better, let's get slightly esoteric on this, we find ourselves in that better flow and that better momentum and that better bond when that rapport is already there. If I'm having this conversation with you and I'm thinking to myself that I need to make